Excited to have you with us. Thank you for being here. Our webinar today is to help celebrate National Masculinity Week. And we have two amazing men here to help us have a conversation about masculinity today. My name is David Stolman. I'm president and co-founder of CAMPUSPEAK and excited to really engage in this conversation. A few years ago, we started National Masculinity Week. And our effort was to engage campuses in having a conversations that matter about this concept of masculinity today that will really fit and support men today. And this wide range of an idea of what it could mean, because our men, especially our men on college campuses, need these conversations now more than ever. And both our students as well as our faculty and staff need these conversations. And quite honestly, Campus Speak started this. We did it in the same vein as we had started National Hazing Prevention Week back in 2007. We saw the success of National Collegiate Alcohol Awareness Week in framing and having important conversations that quite honestly were saving people's lives over the years. And so we started Hazing Prevention Week to do that as well. And in that same structure, we decided to launch the National Hazing Prevention Week. Now, further along, we realize that masculinity is such an important conversation to be had with our college students and on our college campuses that we have started and created this set of resources and engaged campuses in having these conversations. And so you can go to our website and you can find resources so that you can engage in conversations throughout the entire week and really support the men on our campuses that need this conversation to be had. With us today is Jared Sampson, and he's the president of the board of directors of the Los Angeles LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce. He's the former director of Pride events, and where he produced major events like We Who Pride in San Francisco Pride. He's an entrepreneur, a professor, and advocate for LGBTQ plus visibility. His work's been recognized by Events Marketer, BizBash, and other industry publications. In 2018, he received the Human Rights Campaign's Equality Award for opening up powerful conversations about masculinity and identity as a gay Black man on Bravo's Southern Charm in New Orleans. Please, we're excited to have you. Please feel free to pull in deeply into this conversation from your areas of expertise. Also, we have Judson Kauffman. He's an adventurer and an innovator. Started his career as a Navy SEAL, where he served as a sniper and team leader with 3 combat deployments in the Middle East, and doing so earning multiple decorations. After a decade with the Navy, he transitioned into business, where he co-founded 3 successful companies across 3 different industries. And throughout his career, Judson's earned a reputation for disruptive and intuitive thinking. Today, he's serving his life's purpose to help others find fulfillment and maximize their positive impact on their world. He's earned master's degrees in business from the University of Texas and been given the Future Legend Award by the Texas Business Hall of Fame. Judson's a dedicated family man with 4 young children, and he enjoys teaching his kids free diving, fly fishing, reading, traveling, and serving others. And in his free time, he also dabbles in poetry, music, comedy, and film. We're excited to have you as well to really have a big tent conversation about this idea. I think masculinity as a thought, as an idea, as a construct has been so narrow for so many years. To widen the scope and the aperture of how we see this, I think is essential. And so as we get started, I'll ask you, Jared, first, and then Judson, to just, if you were on a campus and you're going to be able to get them thinking and to get them asking questions that will really engage in conversations that matter about this concept of masculinity that brings more people in and more deep thought. If you're asking some questions, what are the questions that you would throw there for a college campus to be thinking about?
Thank you, David. I think that we really need to understand where people are coming from. College campuses are where people sometimes really find themselves for the first time being in an environment where they are, quote unquote, a man, right? So they are now on their own. They're not at home with mom or dad anymore. And now all that they learned is being brought with them. So I think it really just takes understanding. You're asking students all these other questions about their background as they come on to a college campus. But I think we really need to have this as a part of maybe orientation, really just understanding, like what this environment is. Is it an environment that is a sports culture, which sometimes, we know sports cultures can dominate in terms of certain ways in which men show up. So, each campus really needs to understand what the expectation is and to set the expectation for what people are bringing and what they should be leaving that campus with. So really just engaging in dialogue and making sure there are men on campus who offer an opportunity for people to come in and ask questions, right? Be it the coaches or the professors or anyone else on that campus. Their advisors, as they join student organizations, they're going to be, you know, led and mentored by whatever advisor, whether it's a Greek advisor or any other organization that has a faculty member or a staff member who is there leading the way. So really just making sure, people understand what that environment is. And it's okay to explore yourself and to identify yourself with, you know, with people who are there to learn, and there to teach. So I think it's just really important to set that establish that this is a place for men to evolve.
Yeah, Jared, I think that's well said. I don't have much to add. I think dialogue is the answer. If you feel like you have a solid definition of masculinity that is superior, I would challenge you to question that. You're probably wrong because it is a complex issue. It's a difficult thing to define, especially for a nation of 300 million people. It means different things, and so I would encourage people to engage in dialogue and ask questions as opposed to make statements. That is how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we find commonality in a peaceful way, which is the American way.
Absolutely.
I want to lean into some areas of strength for both of you. And I think, Judson, and seeing your programs and knowing the work that you do, that connection and authentic relationships it's like cornerstone of so much of the success that you have in pulling people in. So when we're thinking about this idea of building those authentic and meaningful relationships, and the interplay of that concept of masculinity within that process, a lot of the people that are going to be watching are leaders, or Jared, the people you were talking about that are our advisors and that are our mentors. When you're thinking about those authentic relationships being in an environment where we foster those being made, and the interplay of that concept of masculinity within that, talk to these leaders, talk to these mentors that we have here in our webinar with us about how these two concepts interplay, and how this idea of masculinity can be broadened to incorporate stronger and deeper, meaningful relationships, if you would, Judson.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there to unpack. I think that authenticity, it's become a buzzword. I think it's abused. I think a lot of people who believe they're authentic are actually struggling to find their authentic identity. And so there's a lot of sort of virtue signaling around this concept of authenticity. But as cliche as it may be, as mainstream as it may be, it is central in real growth. And so I think we have to first acknowledge, and it seems like we have as a society acknowledged, that there is a crisis at hand with respect to boys and men and masculinity. I think we can all agree there's a problem, and it's been going on for some time, 10, 20, 30 years, maybe a bit longer. So if we agree there's a crisis at hand, then we need to look at, all right, what's causing this crisis, and have conversations around that. So the researchers point to primarily three things. These are the academics that study this problem. Number one, men seem to lack emotional intelligence, and that is driving towards this crisis. It's contributing towards this crisis. Number two, men are lonely. And number three, men seem to feel this lack of a sense of purpose. So there's a lot of great organizations and great leaders that are acting towards one of these or all three of these sort of specific issues. But my concern is that these are not the root cause. In fact, these are all second or third order effects of a shared root cause. And so the question is, all right, what's the root cause? And without getting into the data, which I've looked at extensively, we can determine that the root cause is something much deeper than any one of those three things. The root cause is that essentially men are suffering from this societal identity crisis. And you touched on it earlier, David, in the introduction. This identity crisis manifests in different ways. We have society is telling us verbally that it wants us to be a certain way, yet society is still rewarding us based on this old sort of narrative, right? We're still rewarded, men specifically, for the kind of traditional masculinity, the neoliberal era definition of like the stoic protector, provider, who is the primary breadwinner, who is tough, all of these things. That is still largely what we reward men for. Yet socially, we're saying, no, that's outdated. What we want is compassionate, loving, nurturing, open-minded men. So that's tough for a lot of guys to reconcile. And I think that's contributing to where we're lost. So how does this circle back to authenticity? Some of the best work I've come across around the idea of identity and authenticity is from Viktor Frankl, who was this Austrian Jew and psychotherapist who was in prison in Auschwitz. And as an Auschwitz prisoner, he also provided his fellow inmates with psychotherapy. He was later liberated by the Allies, came to write a book and publish his research. And what he found, well, many things, but chiefly among them was this distinction between those in Auschwitz who lived and those who died. And what he said was, it didn't matter how healthy you were, how much the guards liked you, how young or old you were. None of that made the difference. What made the difference is those who survived, they found meaning in their experience. And those who died did not. They could not find any meaning or purpose in that experience. And so they withered away. And either the guards were upset with how low the energy was and they murdered them, or they just died of natural causes. So going one step deeper, he analyzed that those who were able to find meaning, they had a very strong sense of their identity in an authentic way. In other words, they had these authentic identity anchors that were true to who they were, sans what society or the situation told them. The other people who didn't quite know who they were, they experienced this total existential vacuum, this existential crisis. I don't know who I am. I don't know what this means. This means nothing to me. They withered away and died. We're experiencing the same thing now in America en masse. It's this massive gender-specific crisis of identity. And the solution is the same, which is we have to explore who we are as individuals. And we have to be given the leniency and the courtesy by society to be open and be accepted for whatever we find is there.
That's really powerful. And it actually is a great segue, because I know Jared's Zone of Genius is really helping people look in the mirror to identify those strands of their pieces of identity, that intersection of who they are, the ability then to not just identify it, but to embrace that as a part of your power, as a part of what is special about you that you bring to this community of small or large people that we're around. And so, Jared, with that, I really want you to lean into that interplay between identity and masculinity and identities and the intersection of all of them, and how that plays with one's search in the mirror to find their identities and how that intersect with that piece of them that's masculinity, and then how that's manifested in the way that they live. That search, if you could talk a little bit about that within an individual and then how that interplays within community.
Yeah, I think definitely what Judson mentioned about it starts individually. It's an individual approach to understanding who you are and being okay with not showing up how other men around you show up, right? You don't have to show up one way. And it doesn't mean that you are less than a man. It doesn't mean that you have something, missing or deficient in you. It's just we're all different, right? We all have different deficiencies, and we just have to identify, okay, well, maybe I am not this particular version of a man, but in many ways I show up stronger. I am a thinker. I am emotional. I am able to carry something for someone that doesn't involve my muscles or anything like that. So I think it's really just understanding where your strengths lie. If we take away this kind of one definition of a man, we really see that real men, authentic men, will show up in ways that society actually needs us. So you need to show up in a way that society needs you. And society right now doesn't need any more brawn or more strength or more, toxic masculinity. We need men to be thinkers and doers and feelers. And really just kind of bring us to another level of understanding. If men are the quote unquote lead, then we need men to lead with their hearts and their minds. And so I think it's just really taking a moment to pause. Like you said, look at yourself in the mirror. What are you okay with? What are you not okay with? It can't feel good to carry this heavy weight, this responsibility to be something that you're not. And it doesn't matter if it's your sexuality or just your compassion, whatever it is, you have to really identify your core, your heart, you know, and it might mean going against the grain. It might mean, being called a name or being misunderstood or being ostracized. If you mention that men are already lonely, hey, we'll spend that lonely time really being the best version of yourself versus just another version of someone else. Being lonely and miserable, you can be lonely, but you don't have to be miserable. So I think the misery is carrying the torch that does not serve anything or anyone. So I don't know if that fully addressed the question. If there's something that I missed in there, let me know.
I want to pull one of the threads when you're talking to someone about showing up authentically, and they've identified sort of who they are and they're more comfortable. What power does that bring when they're able to communicate that the who they are within this group, and what power does that naming their identity and bring that in terms of this interplay with masculinity and within groups? If you could
It's
speak
the
a little
power of
bit to
free. It's
that.
freedom. Yeah, freedom is everything in this world. If you don't have freedom, you have no power. So you have to have freedom of mind, freedom of being who you are, whatever that means. I think sometimes people just really get hung up on whatever society has told us we have to be, and they want to show up that way. They don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons. They don't want to go against the grain. No, I guarantee you, the freedom that I've experienced in my life and my career as someone who came out later in life, if you will, or let the world in, I was like, why was I carrying that? Why did I carry that bag with me for so long? Why did I carry that burden? I was already authentically myself. Everyone who quote unquote, oh, already knew, or because I never tried to hide my identity. I just never told anyone. I just didn't feel the need to confirm. But in that confirmation of I am a man, I'm a good man, I'm a smart man, I'm an emotional man, and I just happen to be gay. And I show up in ways that many other men who don't identify as a part of the LGBTQ plus community, I show up in ways that they could never, and that they could learn a little bit from me, because I feel like it's just a to be a man is really just to be able to take the lead. If you want to go down the stereotypical path, it's a leader. It's someone who protects. It's someone who helps and who provides. So then provide people with the best version of yourself, not an unhealthy version of yourself, not a confused or miserable version of yourself. Provide them with your most authentic, genuine self. And if that means you have to cry, or you have to stand out, or you show up in a way that other men don't, then that's okay. I think it's definitely okay to give yourself permission to be whoever, whatever, however you want to be.
You open the door, and I want to talk a little bit about, and I'll ask you, Jared, and then Judson, if you could weigh in, the role that mentors can play in helping we're going to be, like, again, viewed by a lot of leaders, and they could be a peer mentor, someone who is just a few years down the road as a student leader. And we could also be talking about faculty and staff who are leading and mentoring many. If we could focus a little bit about pouring into them and their skills and their abilities as a mentor to help foster that strength and that conviction for people to be able to identify masculinity in themselves as men, how they want to show up in a way that's powerful but also authentic. If you're speaking specifically to the mentors out there, what advice, what thoughts could you leave them when they're thinking about what kind of culture they want to lead, whether it's in a classroom or a student organization, a sports team or a fraternity? When we're speaking to those mentors, what advice and what framework do you want them thinking about? Jared, and then if you could, Judson, lean in on both of you.
I think it's really understanding the audience. You have people who are coming here to learn. You have people who are coming here to discover themselves before they go out into the quote unquote real world. This is their opportunity. These are 4 impressionable years. You know, when you get these students um, as freshmen, and then when they go through the journey and graduate, what are they leaving behind, and what are they leaving with? You know, you want them to leave it better than they found it. So I think you have to understand your responsibility. Every interaction with those students is going to be an opportunity to literally change the world, because that person is going to be someone's boss. They're going to be someone's, you know, employee. They're going to contribute something to society. So what are they leaving your campus with, and what can they leave behind? So no, it's a pretty big responsibility. It may seem like, oh, the student's just having a bad day, but no, that your interaction with them can change so many lives. So think about that student being a seed, and you have to pour into them and water that, and fertilize that seed that's going to grow up to be a mighty oak, and they're going to really be able to do something in the world. So know that your campus is really a beautiful place for people to foster healthy, responsible mindsets that can change the world.
Yeah, I look at it from a deeply philosophical perspective, mentorship that is. And so I start with the big question, which is, well, what is the purpose of life in general, right? Why are we here? And while that can be a very difficult thing to wrestle with intellectually, there is near unanimous consent across all the great spiritual traditions, from Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Baha'i faith, Sikhism. I mean, the list goes on. There's near unanimous consent on what that purpose is, and it's defined in different ways, but essentially, it is to become one with the divine, right? This is what all of these teachers say. It's to expand your consciousness to the point of where you sense this unity, this interconnectedness with all things. So if we say, all right, well, that's our purpose of life, then we look at, well, how do we get there? And so then you look at the teachings from these same teachers plus the non-spiritual, like Socrates, Aristotle, etc. And what we learn from them is that the real pathway to that is through self-discovery, self-awareness, right? This is the hill that Socrates died on. One of my favorite quotes from Jesus is, "The kingdom of God is within you," which is the same thing, right? And so that's the point. As you go on this journey of self-awareness, you discover, if you have the courage to go deep enough, you discover that you are not separate from all other human beings. You discover this interconnectedness that all these great teachers and even people from the world of physics and quantum physics talk about, is that all things are connected. You realize that. And when you realize that, your focus goes from serving the self to serving the whole. And so that is really what we want our young people to embrace. We want them to pursue this so they can discover for themselves. It's not about you. You aren't the center of the universe. You are part of this interconnected web, and we are all one. And so if you can help young people understand that, lead them towards that through teaching, not informing, this path of self-inquiry really, I think, is the highest path that you can aid someone on, because it takes you towards the purpose and the meaning of life. And we look at our society, we're so driven by material outcome, which has produced so much for the world. Like, hats off to capitalism in America and innovation. It's great. However, we aren't very happy, and we aren't very happy because we've been chasing the wrong ends, right? We should be chasing the one I've just described. And so my advice to mentors is help young people learn who they are. Don't give them specific advice on what to do or how to do it. Just ask them questions that take them deeper on that journey of self-awareness.
I love that. I love that. It reminds me of something I heard, that the idea, and again, it's of a religious background, that, a great spiritual teacher said, I keep two truths, one in each pocket. One is that the entire world was made for just me. And the other is that I am just a grain of sand and nothing more than a grain of sand. And that dichotomy of concept of self within the larger, and my purpose and meaning, I think those are the questions that, yes, good mentors can help us identify ourselves, go deeper into that into that self-reflection and knowing themselves to be able to then become a better person is kind of the best mentorship that we can offer up. From the big
Absolutely.
picture, from the big picture, I want us to get a little tactical as well.
Let's
And
go.
so, you're in a position that can challenge people that are running programs on college campuses, that are leading and establishing events, or the way that they coach teams, the way that they communicate on flyers, and all sorts of, whether it's language or structure of the activities and the things that we do to create and support cultures of men and the individual development of these men. And as you're thinking about the how things run and the way things are done on a college campus, and this departure from old and sort of the prior structures of the view of masculinity, are there things that we are doing on college campuses that are making that friction more difficult for our men to accept? You had talked earlier, Judson, about the things that our culture in general reward compared to the expect. Are there areas of friction like that that we see on college campuses in the way that our organizations maybe are run, or the way that the operationalizing of college in general, that we could poke at and maybe cause people to step back and think, that may be causing more friction on that individual in the way that we are interacting with this idea of masculinity? So if we can get tactical and think of maybe it's one small way or a few small ways that we are communicating, or that we are structuring events that may be barriers to men actually identifying and fulfilling that idea of masculinity for themselves. Can we think of any? Can we
Yeah.
point to tactical ways and strategies?
One that comes up for me, and there's many, we can bounce this around for a minute or two, is challenging our sort of default binary thinking. That is to say, we so frequently will set up an event and say, okay, we have this group who is from the left, or they're Democrats, and this group is from the right and they're Republicans. We're going to have this peaceful debate. I think the very premise of that is extremely limiting, because what we should be after is not this or that, but how can we integrate both? And if we can start to focus more on what we have in common and establishing this sort of bond over that, and engage in this dialogue, understanding that we both may be right about the same things. We both may have overlap. We may have more overlap than we believe. And if we can set it up as, hey, this third perspective is not left or right, but it's actually above. And it's able to detach from our own biases, even though we might like those biases. We might never change those biases. It's okay to be biased, left or right, or whatever way. What's not okay is to refuse to try to detach from that, so that you can see back to your two truths in two different pockets. Can you see both of those and evaluate and assess them in a way, in a peaceful, intellectual, thoughtful, open way? And so that's my first challenge, is when you're setting up these events, make space for that third, what I call an integrated perspective, as opposed to just making room for A or B.
Yeah, and I can add to that too, that, as we talk about integration, keeping in mind that, we're talking about masculinity, the opposite of that, femininity, understanding what both are and that there's space for both. And then also that there are people on a spectrum of sexuality, of gender identity, and just making sure that as we're creating spaces, that they are, to me, gender fluid, neutrality. Where are the neutral zones? Where can you go to an event that's not, men aren't expected to just show up and just, and women can feel safe and secure, and everyone in between. So I think it's really just having overall programming that speaks to everyone, programming that speaks to our humanity, that doesn't have to just be like, oh, if I go to this and it's going to be perceived as such and such. So for instance, I come on a campus and I speak and I'm talking about sexuality or gender identity or anything about identity in that space. And do people feel safe to come? Do they feel like if I go to this, people are going to wonder why I'm coming to this? Why do I want to know about this topic? So I think it's really just, creating programming that is supportive, that everyone should be there. So you don't have to feel singled out for one reason or another. So just making intentional steps to make this feel like it's an awareness, it's a it's something for the campus. It's of course for the individuals, but it's something that everyone should come and support. It's an opportunity again to learn. So making it first and foremost informative educational opportunities where people can really come together as a campus versus feeling like they oh I can't go to that because oh that's for this group or that group. No, let's make programming intentional, make it inclusive and broad and diverse and celebratory of the way this campus operates.
That has hints of, in your Silence to Strength program, Jared, you're talking a lot about how you invite people into the space and then invite them to really kind of speak and speak themselves into this conversation that's larger, and the strength of really being able to speak up. And that
Mhm.
sounds a little bit like you're heading that direction. So I'm gonna ask you to give a little bit more in those spaces where we pull people together. How do you encourage on your programs and encourage people that are doing programming to pull people from silence to strength?
I think again, it's just an invitation. It's letting people know this is a safe space. This college is where we come to learn. And so we want everyone to come here and just like in class, you're here to learn. You're not here to, you know, to do the same thing. The reason why this programming is here is to encourage you to be different, to think different, to experience someone's perspective that you may not have ever met. So I think it's just really about, you know, collectively all programming has to kind of have that same general tone, so that way when there is a subject matter that people may not be comfortable with, they know, okay, no matter what, it's a safe space. Just like I was able to go and learn about hazing prevention, no one's there to judge me, no one's saying my organization is doing something wrong. It's another way of thinking. It's just a reminder. So it's a reminder, it's a refresher, it's a just really opportunity, and presenting it as if like this is no different than taking a college class. You're taking this is just an outside extracurricular activity. It's no different than going to class and learning an uncomfortable truth about history, learning an uncomfortable truth about how people in your culture or your, background may have treated other people. So it's really just making sure the objectives are clear. I think making people know that there are objectives to the programming, there is purpose to the programming, there is, reasons why the leaders are bringing these particular speakers to campus. It's just to make sure the campus is a better place as a whole, a healthy place, a safe space, because there's someone on that campus that might need to hear this. And it may be one person who has my shared identity, but is it really for that person, or is it for the people who don't know and the people who keep showing up or who have not had an opportunity to experience? So know the audience, know that, you may be bringing a speaker in to make a certain group feel great, and you may be bringing a speaker in to really educate and hold accountability, up to someone who may not be doing what they're supposed to do. So it's not always a problem, it's not always a crisis, but it's just really opportunity.
And Judson, one area I know of your zone of genius is really that concept of resiliency. And so I want to lean into this idea and how it interplays with masculinity in particular. As you're on stages and you're really inspecting that idea of what does it mean to be resilient and how do we grow resiliency in others? How does that interplay with this idea of masculinity as well?
Yeah, I think one connective piece of tissue there is this idea of authenticity. Um, but I'll back up a minute before we get to that and kind of talk about how I define resilience and what I think the proper definition of resilience is. And I think it starts with our misunderstanding of resilience. I come from a background in the military where people think that everyone who's in a combat role or all Navy SEALs are highly resilient. Well, that's not true. What those men have in common, what they have, which is worthy and deserves respect, is mental toughness. And we confuse mental toughness and resilience. We think they're the same thing, but they're not. So let's talk about that for a second. Mental toughness is a very useful tool. And so if you experience a traumatic event or a stressful situation, mental toughness is the tool that you use to carry yourself through that experience. Um, but once that experience is over, that's where resilience kicks in. So resilience comes from the world of physics, where it's defined as an object's ability to return to its form after it experiences stress. So as human beings, our form is not physical, it's our identity. And so resilience is our ability to come back to who we are after some terrible thing happens in our life. Mental toughness is the thing that helps us deal with that thing while it's happening. Resilience is the thing that helps us return to our form after that happens. And so how do we return to our form after we experience trauma or stress? Well, first of all, we have to have an authentic identity. Back to my earlier points on what that means. We have to have authentic anchors to who we truly are, not some form of identity that we've created intellectually based on the external environment, like my title, the school I went to, the position I play in sports, the company I work for. All those are what's called false identity anchors. So an example I use often is Steve Jobs. He was fired as the CEO of Apple in the 80s or early 90s. And when that happened, he went into a years-long depression. And he didn't come out of that depression until he understood this very thing I'm talking about, which is that he said, I'm not the CEO of Apple. That's how I've defined myself forever, but that's not who I am. Who I am is a visionary technology leader. That defines me. And when he had that discovery, it was very, very liberating. And he escaped that depressive state, became the CEO at Pixar and another company, and then finally Apple again, and he was unstoppable. And it's because he had this authentic anchor to his identity. So when we talk about resilience, that's what it is, and it's knowing who you are. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just a little more on how that connects to this idea of masculinity, that part right where you left off, knowing who you are, bring in this concept
Yeah,
of true and authentic understanding of masculinity as well, if you would.
yeah. So a lot of men are really stuck and lost in between this. I call it the neoliberal era. So that's sort of the 1980s, 1990s to the post-neoliberal era, often called the woke era, which began with George Floyd, and Occupy Wall Street became a part of that, and so many other micro movements, all sort of historically now have formed into this period of time, which we could call either the post-neoliberal, but that's a mouthful. I prefer the woke era. So there are these two different narratives, and the woke era's response to the neoliberal era's definition of masculinity was, no, you're wrong. That's irresponsible. Men are not just these, tough, stoic cowboy providers. We need men to be much more than that, which is true. The problem with that sort of general response during that woke era is that we diminished and dismissed the old definition. We said, no, 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 throw that out. We threw the baby out with the bathwater. But that's not what we should have done. We should have integrated them both, right? It's perfectly acceptable to be a traditional man who enjoys being, somewhat stoic, likes being the provider, likes being the big tough protector, physically protecting. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we said was there is something wrong with that. The idea behind it was headed towards the right direction, but execution failed. And it probably had to happen that way. And so now we're entering in this phase where I hope we're beginning to integrate both and say, okay, there's good things from both, and there are certainly bad things from both. Let's throw those out. Let's integrate these two things, and we become something more. So if the path to resilience is self-awareness, so is the path to authentic masculinity, what I call integrated masculinity, right? In both cases, what we have to do is get to know who we are to the point where we can comfortably and calmly and with love say, this is who I am. And we can call out inauthenticity and fakeness when we see it from a position of love and confidence and leadership. Does that make sense?
I love that. Derek, what are your thoughts?
I just feel like you just described what happened on that swamp boat that day. Integration. So I think, myself, I had to integrate and figure that out, right? I was in the mindset of, I know I'm this, society says I need to be this. So where can I live in that middle? And when confronted with an opportunity, I found that strength, that quiet strength that had already always been there, to really just integrate both. the best parts of both sides, right? The side of me that is confidently this Black gay man, and this man over here who's trying to do what society says I need to do, and just integrating that. And I think that's a beautiful point that you just made. It really just kind of hit home for me, is that it's all about integration, being just finding that area that feels safe and right for you. You know, you can be the provider, but also be this. You can be emotional, but also be strong. You can have all of that. And I think once we are comfortable to stay in that space, to stay in the state of duality, I think we'll be a much better society, where we're not just going down this path of just got to keep, banging away and, cavemen mentality and just trying to, society's evolving, technology's evolving, but we're not. That doesn't make sense. So we have to change. We have to evolve. It's evolution, and some people are afraid of it. They're afraid of men showing up a different way, and then they take it and misconstrue it and, oh, men and women sports and all this other stuff, and try to, it's just like, it's fear. It's a fear of letting go of what's comfortable and what has served some people very well, in terms of how they have been able to dominate industries and campuses and all these things. So it's like, okay, no, it's okay. We're letting you know that we can do some of this heavy lifting too. Let's take a pause. Let's take a break from this one way of doing it, and just integrate new things. It's going to be a process, but we can do it. As a society, we can definitely do it. And I think when we are on the other side of it, I think people will see that like you said, it has to happen. It has to happen, or we're doomed.
Damn right. I'll just add on, David, if you don't
No, please.
mind. I think something Jared and I are both sort of talking to, but we haven't stated with a point, is this idea of self-transcendence, which a lot of the psychologists, I love Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, another one named Claire Graves, who came up with a cool model called spiral dynamics, which is this model of the evolution of human consciousness. So we evolve physically. Right now, humanity is getting larger physically. Our brains are getting bigger. We also evolve in terms of our consciousness. And so that's what spiral dynamics is. And we can either spiral upwards towards something that is more noble, or we can spiral back downwards, which was the case, let's say, in Stalinism and Nazism and Leninism. We went the wrong way. But the idea that all these psychologists talk about is that the goal of life is self-transcendence, right? And this harkens back to my earlier discussion on what the purpose of life is. It's another way to state it, is you transcend the self, which is to say that you have to go, to Jared's point on fear, you have to have the courage to go inward, identify what your fears are. And if you have that courage and you face those fears, these are what the mythologists say are your dragons or your demons. You got to go slay your dragons. These are your deep-rooted fears. And they're the things that keep you stuck where you are. They keep your mentality stuck in a certain box that was defined by teachers and parents and books and movies that you watched as a child. And so to break through those and become a person who transcends a sense of self and can integrate different parts without being so rigid, it requires that exploration of who am I and what am I deeply afraid of. And that was Jared's pathway. That was my pathway to, much more fulfilling life. And that's how we can spend our time and energy.
I love this.
Everything for me changed when I got out of my own way, and when I integrated, everything changed. It went from, still being the leader, but now being able to be that authentic version of myself and leading in spaces that felt good to me, that felt like I was living out my purpose and able to help promote a pride event, like an event that it meant so much more to me, knowing that I had that personal struggle. So now I'm able to bring more, that resilience, bring the things to this event that I think permeate to everyone that attends, when you're able to put that level of love and attention into it. And so this is what campuses could do. Once leaders start to integrate, now you're programming differently, right? Now your campus is starting to vibrate at a different frequency. People are showing up differently. Organizations are thriving. People don't feel like they need to, go to the utmost extremes of hazing. It's okay. It's all right. We can stop. We can pause. We can put all that hate and fear and misguided, energy, but to the side, and just start focusing on things that are actually constructive. A friend of mine, she just actually had a conversation with her son, and he was asking her about that. He's college age, and she's like, "Well, you have a demolition team, not a construction team. You need a construction team. You don't need to keep you brought in the wrecking crew, you got in all this, but now that you have all this, that you've allowed people to come and help contribute to tearing things down that are serving you, where's your construction team? So you need to center yourself around other people who are going to mentor you and help you and guide you and help you build something that will last, So I think it's just definitely, and it takes a group effort. That's his mother giving him that advice. So also women have a hand, not just male leaders have a hand in tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, hey, you know what, that's not constructive, that's a destructive trait, and that's not gonna, where's that going to lead you down the line? So I think we all have to know that it's not just men versus women, or straight versus gay. We're all going to learn from each other, and I think straight men can learn something from gay men. I think gay men can learn something from straight men, good, bad, or indifferent. So I think we all just have to take a moment and have these types of conversations, right, and really understand that this person is doing the best they can. In their circumstances may have shaped how they show up, may shape what they say, what they're not saying, but I think we really have to create those healthy conversations, those safe spaces to really start integrating, being from the South, integration, that's a very loaded word, in terms of people walking through and going to school and being the only person. Sometimes you may be the only one. You may have to integrate people and show them a different way, and so as a Black gay man, I've had to integrate a lot of different organizations and really just show up in a way they're like, you're different. I don't know what it is. I might have a guess. I might be able to, assume some things, but at the end of the day, but I like you and you're good. And like now you're seeing that this is okay to have people who look like me, talk like me, walk like me in this space. And it's okay to let them lead, and it's okay to let them bring their influence to a space. It doesn't take away from anything that's been going on, but it could actually get better if you really create that space.
I think that's in general what we're trying to do is stretch this tent that covers this idea of masculinity and stretch it to allow more to authentically live with each other under that space.
Yep.
And that the more that we are able to do it, the more we model for others to be able to show up. And quite honestly, we started a lot of this conversation in contrast to the external conversations about men and about this idea of masculinity and it being tied to the concept of toxic, and others defining what masculinity might be, as opposed to us coming together and defining masculinity and finding ourselves in it in a wide broth of what it could mean, but at the same time identifying behaviors that may be specifically toxic or problematic, and it's not masculinity that is, and allowing for, as Judson was saying, that multiple views of there's more of a historical view, and if people live that and genuinely are living that isn't evil or bad and by nature, that it can coexist next to something that is very, very different from that, and in many ways supporting each other, showing up authentically, if we're allowed to open up the door for people to show up as they truly are. And I think that's really the conversations we want to have happening around us.
Yeah.
A last push in this idea of, if you were driving this bus in terms of the conversations and how they could be happening, how are we inviting people into it? How could we create definitions through a collaborative means on our college campuses? And how do we pull people in to be a part of that process more deliberately and do it, in a successful dialogue? What suggestions and thoughts and tips could you bring from your perspectives on how to do this? Are there particular audiences we want to tap and pull them in? Are there thought leaders that we would want to bring in? How would you help campuses that want to have stronger conversations and again, stretch that tent to allow people to live authentically under it? What advice would you be giving them?
Who do you want to start?
Whoever's ready.
One thing that comes to mind for me is I still see the use of divisive terminology, which I think it are remnants of eras that should be bygone at this point. One of them is toxic masculinity. I think that's a terrible phrase. We have to get rid of it. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There are insecure people. There are inauthentic people, and those are the ones who we end up labeling as being toxically masculine. But masculinity is a neutral concept. And I think using phrases like toxic masculinity, a lot of people a lot of men immediately put their guard up, and they dismiss the entire system or process or event around this conversation. They're not even going to show up. So we have to start from a more neutral point of view, using phrases that are inclusive of of everybody. And I think we've made mistakes of being selectively inclusive. If you fit a certain profile, you're included. If you don't, you're not. And then we call ourselves inclusive. It's like, no, you're not. If you're not allowing everyone to show up, you're not being inclusive. So that's the first thought that comes to my mind. Let's have a real open dialogue and allow for all points of view, and withhold our judgment, which is hard to do. That's the first thought that comes to my mind. Jared, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I agree with your points there. I never thought about toxic masculinity in that term of the nuances of it being more insecure people, or, hurt people, as they say. So
Yeah.
it's easy to label something. And I think we have to your point, challenge the labels, challenge our default to to take the popular terminology, right? We to really crack open the situation and know what it is, and know that what's happening on one campus may not be happening on another campus. So to really take time, and as leadership on campus, leadership in different departments, to really come together and understand what your school is doing right, where it needs some help. It's all about, again, education. This is an educational institution. So I feel like those on campus must educate themselves, must be honest and open about their own insecurities, their own quote unquote toxic traits. But I think it's taking time to focus, just really focus on understanding what you don't know, like to take a moment to really say, no, I really don't know. I have this thought. Where did this come from? Why do I think that people who look like this, act like this, walk through this, behave this way? And challenge yourself, and then to say, okay, well, now what can I do to learn? What can I do to change those mindsets? And if I have this and I'm from this community, maybe other people have this. So let me ask questions. Again, engaging in that dialogue, really, doing the self-reflection, understanding you are a part of it all and that you're nothing at all, at the same time. So back to that point. And I think it's just really just sitting in that uncomfortable space. Sit with yourself, ask yourself questions, ask others questions, and then allow others to come in and teach you and educate you on things that you could possibly, you know, do better, or to change, to evolve, evolution again.
Yeah, I think another thought, David and Jared, is that it is so nuanced. It's so much more complex than we want it to be. And so as you're leading, on your campus or putting together these events, I think starting from that position that this is much more nuanced than I can appreciate, and building that into the overall architecture of whatever it is that you're trying to do. Um, it's not binary.
Neutrality.
Allowing
Yep.
it to be
Everything has to
messy.
be neutral. Yep. And
I
let
mean,
it,
that's
again, being neutral. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah,
no,
that
I think
neutrality,
you're right.
we live in that neutrality. We live in that in that in between.
Mhm.
Everything can't be overly positive, it can't be overly negative. So let's have something in between. Let's invite people who see it from Judson's point of view, Jared's point of view, other speakers within Campus Speaks point of view, because I think a lot of us do live in that beautiful space. And I think that's where I do believe that we come together, um, in a space that makes it okay. We're not judging you. We're here to encourage you. We're here to create that safe space on no matter what topic it is, hazing, alcohol prevention, all of these things. We're not here to say you did it wrong, shame on you. We're here to say, hi, I've been able to master my problem, master my issue, master my mind. And I want to help you do the same. I want you to see how it can be done in a neutral way where everyone can benefit from it by coming to the center, coming to the safe space. The safe space, being from New Orleans originally, the neutral ground, right? The neutral ground is the grass in the middle of the street where we come together, and it's that neutrality. We can all come here and enjoy ourselves, sit and just rest and take it all in and have conversations and learn from each other and appreciate each other from all different cultures.
And I think the programming that we can be doing on campuses for our men is vast in terms of the opportunities. But one particular theme is allowing those places where men can get together and have honest conversations without fear of judgment about a question they ask or a thought that they have or how they process something, to be able to look inward. And I think some of the program that we could be doing for, again, specifically on this topic of masculinity, or having some of these conversations, bringing people in, having our own resources of coaches and of mentors and of faculty and people who are doing research on these topics, to have dialogue with men from a variety of different perspectives on this one topic, and then how that affects them and the cultures on their campuses. And I know, Jared, it's an amazing opportunity for a campus to bring you in, to have dialogue, and your zones of genius are really helping people to look in the mirror and find the strength and find diversity of that community pulling together for even more strength, both in sharing your story and encouraging other people to share their stories in breaking barriers program, or it's I love the loud and proud, really encouraging people to celebrate the differences in culture. And Judson, I think, in terms of your zones of genius, and not just talking about this wave of men and masculinity and what's coming next and how we are going to be writing this future, but that idea of beyond resilience and pulling this in for the strength of our students, and really everything centered around purpose that you do, purpose, and pulling people onward toward their own purpose to drive their own success. So thank you both for being here to have a messy conversation that's not necessarily simple and binary, and to poke at people's brains, to think about concepts that are kind of big and not simple and messy and challenging, and pulling people into this dialogue. I appreciate both of you, and I look forward to our ability as Campus Speak to host continued conversations. We do have, this is one of many webinars that we are doing, and you can look at our website, campusspeak.com/webseries, to find out what's coming up next. And we hope you're able to participate in them, just as you have this. And so thank you very much to Judson. Thank you, Jared, for being here. And to our audience, thank you for having some of these tough conversations and making an impact on our students. That's all we can hope for, is that the students are going to leave better because of the opportunities we bring for them to be in the room. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.